Astrid takes Darlene home for dinner. This is my new friend, and the layers in friend is no fairly clear, and 'll no be explained. Darlene is winsome now. She's something other as the scar thing o' a tourist Astrid met. A smile in her fun-tackled face, Rory Clay's. In the midst of this family, it's like her body is lowen. Maybe the thought o' parents learnt the performance. With Darlene's silence about her own feathers, Astrid's ower thankful for Inga and Ivan's meat and kindness, until, fair into the meal, she hears their vowels roundin', their consonants clippin', their words switchin' to marry Darlene's own, and gets unspeakable barman. And when her own in is one, she sits quiet, wanting a body to notice, her mother to smile and say, "Bado," and take her back to the old family table. But the heart o' Astrid's silence has awful gravity, and so the conversation is fagan, fan, is hearing itself, is less and less real getting, till it's just Darlene that's smiling and speaking yet.
Hi, I'm Jessica Gaetan Johannesson, and this is Read, Think, Act. I'm delighted to be here with poet and writer Harry Josephine Giles. Hi, Josie.
Hi.
Thank you so much for that amazing reading. So let's start with that reading and what the language means in Deep Wheel Orcadia. Um, for me, reading the book really reminded me of the power dynamics that you always have between reader and language, and particularly the English language, anywhere really, but particularly in relation to minority languages. So I wondered, writing the book, what kind of power did you want to give to the Orkney language?
Oh wow, what a beautiful question. I suppose the power for language in the book, and the reason for the book, is to show that the language has a future and to put the language in the future. That was the impetus. That was like the first spark that made the book happen, when I was thinking, what book do I want to write in the Orkney language? Well, I want to write one in the future. I want to show how a language can happen in space, and how the concerns that I have, or the things that I think about from an island perspective, from a small rural perspective, can also be on this kind of operatic space level scale. So yeah, I suppose it's the imaginative power of science fiction, and what it takes to think about the world differently, or to think the world into the future. And I wanted to show that small languages, rural languages, island languages have that power as much as, or perhaps better than, these big international languages of empire, which is what we're used to science fiction being written in.
And on the very page, you see that power language being, I guess, reversed in one way, because the Orkney has a much larger space on the page. How did that come about, that form?
I chipped away at how to lay out the book for quite a while, because it's a bit of a struggle when you're writing in a small language but you want folk to read it. Do you give them a translation or not? And then if you give them a translation, especially into a language as powerful as English, that translation then will often overwhelm the original, right? So what we did in the book was split the page 2/3 of the way down, and put the English in a smaller font, um, in the bottom third of the page, so that it's clearly a subordinate language. And then I played some games, borrowing ideas from some other writers as well, with how the English is translated, to kind of interrupt it as a language. So we use this technique of compound words, where one word in Orkney might be translated into 4 or 5 in English, that are all kind of shoved together, to kind of show that the English is is contingent and cannot express kind of the full range of the Orkney. So it's these ways of making English strange again and taking away its kind of false transparency.
I love that, the idea of false transparency, because as someone who speaks English as a second or actually third language, I think it brings you into that space, and it reminds me of, I guess, English-speaking people or some English-speaking people who find subtitles troublesome, for example. Like it's that sort of idea that, oh, this is what it's like for the majority of the world, which is a fantastic experience to have in the book. Going from the language to reading, I suppose, in general, what has reading meant for you in terms of your political activism? What is the relationship between the very private act of reading and actually going out in the world and doing collective action, I suppose, and organising?
Why? That's now see that in contrast is quite a cruel question. Yes. Because I'm not even sure that it does for me. I don't know that reading is very it is very personal and very I don't know, sacred even. Or reading is when I'm with myself. I read for an hour or two every morning, and have done since I could read. I've never not read, and for me, reading is my safety. It's my personal. Okay, everything's all right with the world. I always have a book. Once I was driving back from hill walking, and my front tire blew out, and I was stuck by the side of the road. And it was the one day I hadn't packed a book in my rucksack, and I was stuck in a sheep field without a book. And that's the one time I didn't take a book up a mountain. And ever since then, I've always had a book, even when I go up a mountain. So that's my way of cheating and not answering your question. And I suppose, I could say, well, I read to learn about the world. I read to learn about folk that aren't me. I read to learn about different perspectives. I read to educate myself, and all that is true. And that is, I suppose, part of politics. But really, at heart, and maybe I'd even defend this for myself, reading is my pleasure and my safety. And I could politicise that, but kind of rather not. I'm quite happy with books just being, for me, privately, the thing that makes me happy. I suppose the challenge for me is that everything that goes into producing books, the vast system of capital accumulation that is publishing, does not make me happy. So like so many things in the world, we have this contradiction where books look after me, but also the way that books are made is totally bound up with the way that the world is being destroyed. So there's a complication.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up as well, because I wanted to ask you about one of the other big themes in the book is communities that are left behind, and the value of work, and what happens when that work changes, or the value is sort of taken away, and what happens with identity of communities at the same time. And I just wondered if, while you were writing and thinking about these things, if that at all made you reflect on your own position in the work that you're doing, and which is inevitably part of the publishing industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose those themes in the book come from coming from a rural background, and coming from a place where the work that people did and the roles that they had in community were so central and known and valued, but also where, the work that sustains Orkney as a place has changed in the last couple of centuries, or couple of millennia as well. And it too is kind of bound up in these enormous global systems. That Orkney is a place where energy is made. It's, it has an oil refinery. It's a place that's dependent on petrochemical agriculture. It's a place that's dependent on cruise ship tourism. And those are the kinds of work that we do to sustain these islands. It's not a pure agrarian paradise that's independent of global systems of fossil fuel consumption, right? And I suppose that's the same thing with my own work, that I love books, I love reading them, I love writing them, and yet, the majority of writers don't exist independent of Amazon, even if we refuse to buy books from it. You know, there's very, very few of us that have the clout to say, well, don't sell my books on it. So we're implicated. We're implicated in the often damaging working conditions across kind of the book distribution network. We're implicated in the systems of power that publishing is an example of, because it's not as if we should ever buy into like the liberal lie that publishers for the most part are interested in just spreading a diversity of ideas in the world. They're not. They're capitalist institutions that are interested in generating profit, and we're part of that system of generating profit. And we become very aware then of how our various forms of diversity are turned towards that goal, and sometimes are turned against that goal as well. So those are my working conditions. Those are the things that I'm responsible for, that sustain my life, that also take away from my life at the same time. And those things are entangled. They can't be separated. There's no outside of that. There's just figuring out how to work your position within that system with something like ethics, if that's possible, or something like solidarity, if that's possible.
Yeah, so would you say that there is no way of working outside of the system at all?
Well, I mean, you can. I mean, I also, I publish scenes. I do things that work relatively independently of publishing, as well as working with publishing. No, I think maybe I'm saying too much by saying there's no outside, right? There's always an outside as well.
But it's very difficult to get to.
But it's difficult to get to, and it has its own drawbacks. Its own. I think rather than saying there is no outside, I would resist the idea that you can ever fully get outside, or that the only answers come from getting outside. I don't know. I mean, coming from like a highly Calvinist influenced culture, there's a certain form of politics, right, that is preoccupied with like getting rid of the moral taint that you carry, that where you have to kind of free all of your actions and all of your behaviors of sin, so that you too can become one of the elect, right? And that's not possible. Like we're fully part of these things. We are responsible for harm, and we can't get away from being responsible for harm. So the question is, well, how do you take responsibility for that as best you can? And I suppose more importantly, how do you work with other people to ameliorate that harm, heal yourself through that? So I think that's what I'm more concerned with, or try to be. And one of the ways of doing that is to sustain bits of your life that are in some way independent of these big systems. That's why I make zines, because then I can just have something that's mine, that isn't answerable to anything else.
Oh, that speaks so much to, I think, the kind of climate justice work that I do as well, because I think there is that idea of like the fallacy of hypocrisy, that unless you are perfect, you are not allowed to try and change the system, kind of thing. Which sounds quite similar. Something that just what you were saying about having something that is your own brought to mind as well, finally, as a final question. I think it was something you tweeted a while ago.
Oh no.
It's the worst way to start a question.
Don't bring it. Oh no. Ken, I've declared this the year of no opinions on Twitter. I'm not allowed to have any opinions anymore.
I don't
it's
think
very
this
helpful.
is an opinion.
Okay.
It was about humour.
Oh yeah.
Actually.
That's an opinion I have.
It is an opinion. Okay, I'm going to ask you anyway. Because humour and joy, where does that sit in the relationship between, in trying to subvert the system, in trying to carve out a space for yourself, in trying to kind of, I suppose, resist and exist?
I suspect the tweet was something like, poems should have more jokes in them.
Yeah, something
That's
like
something
that.
I say fairly regularly, because I like jokes, and they're often avoided in poetry, which even now is mostly supposed to be. I love a good joke in a poem. Why does a poem have to be serious all the time? But there's something fearful or cheapening about humour. I mean, I suppose my answer about humour is the same as my answer about anything else, that like the figure of the jester is as much a figure of complicity as of resistance, right? The jester is maybe the best kind of archetype of that, who the jester is hired by the court to mock power, right? That the jester can be brought in as part of the system of power to show that the system of power can laugh at itself. I think actually, diversity in literature functions in a similar way sometimes, or sometimes I feel like I'm being used in that way, when I'm brought in to offer something to a panel that is otherwise extremely boring. So the jester does do that. It is a way of the court to justify itself, but at the same time, the jester's job is to try and go too far, or is to try and use the position that they've been given by the court to upset things even further. That they're a danger that's been brought in, and you've got to keep tapping into what is the dangerous thing that's possible. So I suppose that's my feeling about humour in my own work, or in writing in general, is that it can both be a way of shoring up ordinary ways of thinking. It's also, carnival. It's this one moment where things are different, but if you do it right, or if you find moments, it can break through, or it can upset people more than they knew they were going to be upset, and that's quite a good thing.
Thank you so much for coming along, Josie.
It's a pleasure.
You can find Deep Wheel Orcadia on the Lighthouse website or in the shop. We hope to see you soon.